Well, I grew up in King William County, Virginia. That is very rural Virginia. Let's see, my school was about 60% white, 40% African American. Growing up, I was talking about the John Hopkins survey and what it said about students who have teachers of color. I didn't need that survey to prove that because I had a teacher in elementary school, 3rd and 4th grade. I had two, luckily, African American teachers. And I know the students that were in those classes, most of us went on to college. All of us graduated high school, whereas the African American students who didn't have those teachers, they struggled. And so I know that that's really, really important to have teachers in elementary grades. And then middle school is, growing up in the 80s, 90s, that's where things happened back during the days of tracking. I was on the honors track. So I was pushed into the honors classes with the other 3 black kids. Literally, we took the same courses from 5th through 12th grade, me and those same 3 black kids with the rest of them. But I don't think people understand that the identity confusion you put into young people of color when you separate them from other people of color. And then you constantly tell them that you're different, you're smarter, you're not like the other people. And I'm like, you mean my brother and my best friends? But I had that growing up, so I was constantly fighting that. And then 5th grade changed everything. I started doing band. But it wasn't because I wanted to do band, it was because band was taught by Calvin Sorrell. He was the only African-American male school teacher in my district. And so he was in my neighborhood. I had my fathers and other guys, but they were all blue collar. He was one of the few college graduates I came into contact with growing up. And so he taught me basically how to code switch, how to navigate between those two worlds of accepting my friends and family, but also how to function in the academic world that didn't welcome people like me in my county. And so it was really good. Plus he showed me, he took me to Canada, New York, South Carolina, places I would have never gone. And so I'm forever grateful to him and the opportunities that he supplied me. And then my 12th grade year, my school hired its first black assistant principal, which wasn't done willingly. They just lost 2 discrimination lawsuits my 11th grade year. So they decided, let's go get an African-American assistant principal so we can satisfy the NAACP. But it's weird because we talk about how all students benefit from people of color. I recently had my high school reunion. We're not going to talk about the year. And I remember in that room, there was 100 of us, black and white. Not a single person could name our white principal. But everybody knew Dr. Lewis, the black assistant principal. And so something like that was powerful and what they mean to just all students. And then in my senior year, he made a decision that really changed my life. Because teacher said something racial to me, wasn't the first time. But I was a senior, so I was a little tired of it. I've been dealing with it for some years. So I turned the desk over, said some words I'm not going to say here at NC State University. But I got sent to the office, and when I got to the office, I remember Dr. Lewis sat me down, and he said, I got a question for you. I'm thinking he's about to ask me if I lost my damn mind. But he asked me, where was I going to college? Now, that threw me for a loop for a minute. But then he said, I see you around school. I know you're a smart guy. I know the incidents you're dealing with. Where are you going to college? And so then he told me about Virginia State University. And he told me how that college molded him from a confused teenager to a confident young man. But then after we talked for, it seemed like an hour, and then I went to leave his room, and I was like, thank you, man, I appreciate it. Then he told me to sit down, and I forgot why I was there. And so, but then he made a decision. He said, I'm not going to send you home because I know you're going to go home and do something stupid. But instead, I'm going to give you 5 days of in-school suspension. And then during the first day of in-school suspension, Dr. Lewis came in, and he helped me fill out my Virginia State application. The second day, he helped me fill out my financial aid paperwork. The third day, he helped me research alumni associations and scholarships because he provided that extra equity I needed as a first-generation college student. Because I had all the white teachers tell me about college, but I didn't know anything about the college process. He took the time out of his busy day as an assistant principal to come in and help me navigate the entire college process. And even to the point where when I was a freshman on campus, he would show up from time to time to take me out for a home-cooked meal because we know how important that is to a college kid, you know? But just that extra equity. And when I go into my classrooms, I think to myself, I want to provide those opportunities that Ms. Broadus, Ms. Hall, Mr. Sorrell, and Dr. Lewis provide for me. And so that's one of my motivating factors in the classroom.
Absolutely. So talk about the moment you decided to become a teacher.
That's clearly my mother. My mother, she wanted to become a teacher, but you know, growing up in rural Virginia in poverty, you know, you face those barriers. And so she had dropped out of school in 6th grade to take care of the family because her mother was sick. Then when she went to go back, they told her she was too old. And so she never got a formal education the majority of my life, but she didn't let that stop her. She ran an in-home daycare, and at this daycare, she told us, hey, it's the job of the older generation to make things better for young people. And she often ran this daycare for free. She would tell all the parents in the neighborhood, drop your kids off, some need, pick them up by 5 o'clock. And the parents would do that. And so my brothers and sisters, we joked we had enough kids to play any sport we wanted to growing up because there were so many kids at our house. But every kid felt loved. They felt they were the most important. And then when those kids went home, we still got that lesson of equity with my brothers and sisters. There was 5 of us, but I have an older sister who had cerebral palsy. And I remember my mother would always tell us, say, I don't love you any less than your sister. However, your sister needs more of my time and attention. And so that was that lesson on equity that I learned. And then the biggest lesson she taught me, she modeled it. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, you know, I needed a ride home for practice, but every day my mom would be there taking GED courses because she wanted to get her GED. So I had to sit in the back of the classroom doing my homework while she was in the front doing her homework, learning, teaching other students that same equity she showed us in our household, she was showing with her classmates as she attained her GED. And so that was really that inspiring moment where I saw my mother doing such great things, and I was like, that's who I want to be like in life. Mm-hmm. And so that's the moment when I decided I wanted to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about your preparation for teaching and the kind of support you had early in your career.
Early in my career, I was lucky. You know, I often tell people I'm where I am because I had solid mentors during my early years of teaching. I remember my first year of teaching, my mentor was a guy named David Hudson, and he's now an award-winning principal in the state of Virginia. My second year was Rodney Berry. He's now the superintendent of the Department of Corrections Education in Virginia. And so I've constantly had great mentors along the way. However, not every teacher gets that experience. And so it's really important to understand the need for strong mentorship when you work with new teachers. Because new teachers feel disenchanted. They feel, I can't do this. And so they feel like they're on an island. And if you have a mentor who doesn't look like them, who doesn't have the same experiences as them, then that teacher's going to feel lonely. And that's the reason why 50% of the teachers leave in their first couple of years, because they don't feel that level of support and they feel burned out. And so it's really important for you to have good mentorship in place and solid community support around those teachers.
And now this is a room of folks who are gathered to think about how we diversify the teaching profession and how we support teachers of color once they get to schools. What advice do you have for them, both on affecting the pipeline of teachers of color and making sure that folks feel supported?
One thing I do is I seek out mentors. I seek out mentees. Every year when we have our district staff development, I'm at the front scouting like I'm, Pat Raleigh or something, and looking for the young black males who I see that come in and have that right attitude. And I just go up and I introduce myself and I stay in contact with them. I give them my number and I say, hey, call me, I'm a veteran. There's nothing you're going to go through that I haven't been through. And so we build that solid relationship, and so they can reach out to me when they're going through something. Something as simple as, I need to take this class for certification, recertification, showing them the resources they need. If they're struggling with the test, connecting them with tutors or people in the people that I've known through my network who can help them with that. And so it's really important that we create that community around new teachers. And then also within that, we have to create a community around teachers of color. We have to have a safe space. You know, far too often we get thrown in positions and situations where we feel like we're on the island. And so when we're on this island, we need to have other people there with us that understand us, that understand our experience. And so we have to work together to make sure that all new teachers, especially teachers of color, feel supported and not overburdened.
Mm-hmm. Now, often when we have conversations about education, the focus is on kind of the typical school, not necessarily schools like Binford. Talk about what is it that people don't know about schools like Binford that they should?
Well, a lot of times, as often the case in America, when people go to prison, we forget about them. We think that they're gone and we'll deal with them when they get released. However, I think in juvenile prisons, we have a very, very special role because often those students have had bad experiences with education, which is why they're in the juvenile detention center, and they're on a road that's going to lead to adult prison and a life of in and out of jail. And so when they come to us, I often say we have this one moment where we literally have a captive audience. And so it's our job, it's very important that we try to redirect and reset and put our kids on the right track. I tell my kids all the time, I was like, you know, God don't really make no mistakes. And so when you come in here, you're here for a reason. So let's take advantage of this and reset and refocus and move to something positive. And so in our job as educators within that is show them the positive. You know, they've had negative experiences their entire life. It's rare we get a kid who just made a silly mistake. It's usually the result of trauma, their life circumstances, and that's why they're with us. And so we try to surround them with a culture of positivity. You know, and once we build them up, because they're often extremely broken when they come to us. So we have to build them up to show them what they can do, but then also we have to set them on the road to success once they leave us. We have to ensure that they're neighborhood mentors, people that they can go to, people that they can talk to when they leave us, because we can do all the great things on earth, but we send them back to that same toxic situation that they came from, then everything we've done has gone out the window. So we know our job is twofold. To one, make it easier to transition back to education. One of the hardest things in juvenile detention is just transitioning. You know, something as simple as we changed the name of our school. Our school used to be called Richmond Juvenile Detention Center. Imagine if you're a kid going back to another school with a transcript that says Juvenile Detention Center. You've been labeled from the moment you walk into that building. And so we go with Virgin Benford Education Center. And it's something small like that, but it creates a positive change so that gives the kid literally a second chance to start over new. And so when they go in, they feel more confident, and then they are able to be successful because they feel like I've gotten a fresh start.
Mm-hmm. I know we're going to turn to audience questions, but I want to ask you, you've now had the opportunity to travel all over the country. What have you seen around the recruitment and retention of teachers of color in particular that you think folks in North Carolina should know about and hear about?
It's been an interesting experience, I'll say. The good news is that we're acknowledging the problem. You know, a lot of schools and universities that I've talked to, they're acknowledging that they have a problem. However, they don't know how deep the problem is. Because one thing I always do, like when I go to a school and I talk to the students or their education program, I always pull aside the students of color. And I had that conversation of, how is this really? You know, I was recently at a school that, you know, I'm not going to say the name, but they run around boasting that they're the #1 education school in the United States. But the next day I had breakfast with 4 young women of color, you know, and their experience is traumatizing, you know, at that university, and to the point where we're all sitting at a table trying to eat breakfast, but we're all in tears because this was the first time they had somebody they could talk to who can understand their experience. And so how can you go around claiming you're the #1 education school in America but your students of color feel traumatized to the point where some of them are actually considering quitting college? That's how traumatizing their experience has been. And so we really need to Not just say, oh, we're about the work of equity, but actually start listening to people of color when it comes to doing the work of equity. And that's really important. And then also colleges, we need to hire diverse faculty. I went to another university in Maryland, and I got there, and there's a room full of, like most education schools, young white women. But when I sat down to talk to them, rapid fire questions about race, ethnicity, how to relate to students. It was just like, and I asked them at the end, am I the only black person you've talked to in your 4 years in this program? And some of them said yes. And so, and these are young white women, but they want to know, they want to do the work of race, race inclusion, but they don't have people of a different race to show them how to do the work. And so I was pretty much floored, but then again, I thought about it, it shouldn't have been that big a surprise to me, because this is what we do. People hire who they know. And I've seen the university hiring process and understand that there's not too many of us in the room. And we don't have those connections. And so it's important that universities start hiring diverse faculties. I mean, I went to one university that had a program for young black men run by a white woman. I mean, come on. It was comical to me, and so we need to start hiring more diverse faculty if we truly want to attack these issues, because on the surface, it seems like, oh, we're talking a good game, but when it really comes to the work of equity, we're not doing a good game. But as long as we can talk it, we're okay. Like one of the universities, when I took a picture with their 3 black males they had in their program, I kind of made a joke, but it was kind of serious. It was, I don't want this to be on the front of your webpage or brochure next week, And when I went home the next day and pulled it up, guess what picture was right on the front of their webpage for their School of Education? And so it's easy to talk it, but it's much, much harder to do the work. And so we need to get more of us in the work of higher education if we want to really do equity work.
Mm-hmm. What about for school districts and schools? What have you seen either superintendents or principals doing that you would say that's a good set of practices to recruit and retain teachers of color?
Well, it's clearly grow your own programs, and especially we need more of those in minority serving districts, plain and simple. I've seen plenty of Teachers for Tomorrow in the suburbs and in other districts, but I haven't seen many of those types of programs in urban school districts. And so that's really, really important that we start to look at urban districts and start to put the money where our mouth is. And then on top of that, I've talked to some legislators, and they all want to provide scholarships for juniors and seniors. And I'm like, that's not working. The hardest part is getting into college. Juniors and seniors are going to finish because they've done the work for 2 years. We need to start providing opportunities for freshmen and sophomores and high school seniors if we want to get them involved into the work. And luckily, Virginia is starting to roll out a few of those programs pretty soon that are going to target specifically high school seniors, college freshmen, to recruit them into the field of education.
Great, thank you. So now I think we're going to turn to the audience.
I want to thank you all. Plenty of questions have been coming in. And Rodney Robinson, I think the first question I'm going to give to you, and it is, I just lost it there. Okay. What words of encouragement can you provide to teachers who are in schools that have been labeled as difficult or alternative?
Stop labeling yourself as difficult or alternative. A mindset is a positive thing. You have to have a positive mindset when you're working in these types of school, because I often tell them, education is one thing, but a lot of our kids are surviving in those tougher environments. And so as long as your kids are surviving and they're thriving, then don't let anybody else tell you that you're failing, that you're not doing the job you're supposed to do. I worked at a school in Virginia for years that was pretty much labeled the worst school in the state of Virginia. I didn't think that. I thought it was the best school in the state of Virginia. I thought my kids were the best kids in the state of Virginia. And so it's really a mindset change. You can't listen to the outside noise. You listen to those 25 and unfortunately in some cases 40 kids in front of you. They're the ones that'll tell you if you're a success or a failure, not anybody else.
Secretary King, This question of what are other states doing to address gaps that exist between the racial demographics of students and the educator workforce?
Not enough. So, I think there are other states that are doing some work on data transparency. Certainly that's something that Connecticut has prioritized. There are some states that have targeted programs in individual higher ed institutions. There are some states that are putting resources towards bilingual educators, which is a sort of natural pipeline to try to diversify the teaching profession, but it's not enough. California last year, I think, put in $12 million for bilingual educators, right? $12 million in the California state budget is like a rounding error.
That's not a rounding error in this state.
So there's a need, I think, really for folks to go from, as Rodney pointed out, from identifying the problem to taking meaningful, comprehensive action. And it's an opportunity for North Carolina to lead, frankly.
Rodney, how can teachers of color impact students of color when their out-of-school environment overcomes their in-school environment?
You need to take the in-school environment out of school. A lot of times, if you're not willing to go into your neighborhoods and talk to those parents, go to those homes, then you're not doing anything to counteract that negative environment. You're the positive force. You control the climate in your classroom, but if you reach out to those parents and those students and meet them where they are, you can control that environment as well. One of the things I love about one of my students, he always says, I'm the only teacher, me and the basketball coach are the only teachers that stand on the block. But that's a point of pride to me, because when I see my kids hanging out on the block, I'm going to stop and talk to them. Because what does it say to them if I see them outside and I drive past them like I don't even see them? It says that I don't truly care about them. If you truly want to build that relationships, you have to be the transformative person, not only in your school, but in your community. And if you look at the great principals, those are the ones who make the school and transform their community. They make the school reflective of I'm trying to figure out how to say this. But basically the school transforms the community. And so they don't buy into the negative stereotypes or things that people say about their community. They make the school the safe place for everyone in the community to come in, have a good time, and get a quality education.
If you had to give one piece of advice to educators of color, would that be part of what you would say, making the school kind of impact the community? Or
Yeah,
what would you say?
That, but I also would say to go into rooms where you're uncomfortable. Go into rooms where you're not welcome, because that's where you make a difference. One of the unique things about this whole Teacher of the Year is I'm getting into a lot of rooms. And when I get into these rooms, I don't see a lot of us. And so I was always been uncomfortable with that. But it's necessary. If we want to make things better for our students, we need to get in those rooms. When I went to Education Commission of the States, which was a gathering of all the state superintendents and policymakers in the United States, I was appalled. There was no open LGBTQ people. There were no immigrants. There were no there was one African-American male in that room, but to quote the old saying, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, So it's really important, it's really important that we get in those rooms. And as uncomfortable as it may be in those rooms, we have to be there. Because when I started doing this National Teacher of the Year, I was like, I don't want to be put in this box of just the alternative teacher, or just the teacher of difficult, they say difficult, but I say at promise students. Yeah. But I want to represent all students. However, when I get in these rooms, no one's speaking for those students. And so I have to be that voice. As uncomfortable as it may be for me, I have to be that voice, because if not, those issues will get looked over, and that's not equity.
Yeah. Secretary King, in your opinion, what is the single most detrimental action happening in classrooms today that schools can and should address right now?
Wow. I more have a list, but look, this is relevant to this moment in this state. You know, one of the things that teachers do, that schools do, is teach kids about our history. And as we prepare young people to inherit our democracy, they need to appreciate the truth of our history. And to the extent that schools fail to teach young people about the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow, the history of institutional racism, the history of the Civil War, right, the real history of the Civil War. To the extent that folks fail to prepare young people with the truth of our history, then we end up repeating the mistakes of our past. You know, I think about, that's right, I think about what we are doing at the border, having young people, babies, in cages at the border. And I think if more young people had learned about Japanese-American internment in school, we would be less likely to repeat those same mistakes as a country.
So I think,
Can I jump in on?
yes.
One of the things I feel at schools we need to stop doing is exclusionary discipline. You know, we can't put kids out of school. Because if the purpose of school is to educate someone, how is removing them from their environment educating them? And often when I talk to my students, that begins the pipeline. That is where it starts. Some of them was kicked out of school in kindergarten, first, second grade, and so that started that bad school experience. So by the time they get to middle and high school, school ain't for them. And they think that because we told them that school wasn't for them. So it's really important that we stop putting kids out of school and start implementing more restorative practices in our schools to keep them in so that they can actually learn from their mistakes, not just punish them to where they're never going to learn anything and just continue the same behavior.
That answer goes right into this question that I'm going to ask both of you. How can educators work with school support staff, such as school social workers, counselors, and psychologists, to bring the school environment out of school?
Physically go out of the school. You know, one advantage that we had at my old school, we had served a number of the housing projects in the city of Richmond. Well, we're going to move parent night to the housing projects, to their local buildings, their community centers, and so that we're going to bring these services to you. And one thing we're working on in the city of Richmond is we're working on setting up social services, all their community services in the same building. Think about it. If you have a kid who's on probation, he's on, social services, he's in foster care, all these different people are working, but nobody's communicating. So if we put them all in the same building to work together, then first of all, that kid knows he can't game the system, number one. But it also shows the kid that, hey, the system actually has my well-being at heart. I'm not just a number in my probation officer's day. He actually see them every day when I come to school. I can actually get the services for my mother and my sisters when I come to school. And so that's really important that you meet them where they are. Because if you don't, then often parents don't come back to school because the school is the scene of their trauma. And so when they walk through those doors, they have those uneasy feelings. And so therefore, I'm not coming to back to school night. I'm not coming to meet with your school counselor. And so it's important that you just eliminate any barrier or any excuse that a parent can make for participating in that student's lives. Even if that's going to their home every night, you have to do that.
Rodney Robinson, Secretary King, let's give them a round of applause.